We may live over 5,000 miles from Lincoln Financial Field, but what we lack in proximity, we make up for in the film study. And each and every week, we'll be bringing you in-depth film breakdowns from across the pond and the Sooner State. Welcome to On the Shane Page. I am your host, Shane Haff. You can follow me on Twitter at ShaneHaffNFL. And I'm joined by BGN's own film guru, Jonny Page. Give him a follow on Twitter at JohnnyPage9. Jonny, how are you doing this evening?
Yeah, I'm good. You got your fancy backdrop? My wife was moaning at me in the week about how boring my backdrop is with just the mirror. So you've got this nice cool neon sign. It's looking very good. It's weird introducing me as BGN's own when, as you're going to introduce in a second, we've got Mr. BGN here himself. So yeah, it's a cool one. I'm looking forward to this one. A bit of a last minute decision to bring on our next guest, but I will leave it to you to introduce him if I can talk. But yeah, I'm all good. I'm looking forward to this one.
Absolutely. We are also joined by a special guest podcaster. It might have been a little longer than you're used to since you've heard his voice. The man who needs no introduction. It is Brandon Lee Gowton, the editor-in-chief of Bleeding Green Nation. Brandon, how are you doing today?
It is nice to be with you guys here today. Thanks for inviting me on. I'm very happy that you guys are able to podcast and you are podcasting. And I've been enjoying listening to the episodes that you guys have been doing. So I am delighted to be in front of a microphone here once again.
Well, we are delighted to have you. And we're doing today, we had a listener reach out to us after our NFC East draft reviews and asked if we could do an NFC Contenders draft review. And so we're going to do that. We're going to talk about 6 teams that are, the best that according to the odds are most likely to reach the NFC title game. That's sort of how we delineated this. But before we get to that, BLG, I wanted to give you a chance to give some thoughts on air about the Eagles draft. I know you've done some writing, but haven't heard you speak on a pod about it. So obviously for obvious reasons, but what were your initial thoughts about the Eagles draft class? How did you feel about the whole process? I'm just going to open the floor up to you here. Jonny and I have spoken about this a lot, so the floor is yours, my friend. Talk to me about the Eagles draft class.
Well, yeah, I appreciate that. It is nice to actually be able to talk about that. I did a full written breakdown on bleedinggreennation.com called Grading the Eagles 2024 NFL Draft Class. I think it ended up being like, I don't know, 1 billion words, 3,000 words, whatever. So I have a lot of thoughts in there. But on the whole, I liked it. I mean, I think if I had to give it a grade, I know Jonny loves grades specifically. And giving
he also loves predictions and previews.
All that stuff. I would give it an A, I think. And that's factoring in like getting the extra picks next year. I thought that was a big part of it. And I think that there's a lot of value in doing that. I think when I just sum it all up, I think they did a good job Jonny put it really the most succinct way in terms of they did a good job of checking boxes when it came to value, athleticism, and like production. So like what more could you really want when you kind of get high outcomes in all of those categories? And all the while you're addressing like major positions of need, both in the short term and the long term. Quinyon Mitchell is who I had the Eagles taking in my pick for the SB Nation NFL Writers mock draft that we do every year. If I can take a moment to brag, I think hit the last 4 picks in terms of in 2021, I had Devontae Smith there. In 2022, I had Jordan Davis. Last year, I had Nolan Smith. In fairness, I had that at 10 instead of 30, so a little out of whack, but still, I'm taking partial credit. And then this past year, I had Quinyon Mitchell. So I feel like I'm on a little bit of a heater of predicting the picks. I did not think certainly that Mitchell would actually fall to 22. He did. And had Mitchell not been there, Cooper DeJean was someone who I thought would make a lot of sense at 22. They ended up getting him at 40. So I was pretty happy with the draft, all things considered. I think anything after that is, it's not important after the first 2 picks, but certainly a little less important, more about filling out the roster and finding role players and whatnot. And if you hit big, great, but certainly not banking on that. So, the only gripe I would say is you don't find that offensive tackle of the future, which is certainly something that, could be nice to have. I think it was just a matter of the Eagles feeling like they had high grades on, let's say, the first 6 guys or so at that position. And then afterwards, I think there was a massive drop off for them. And it wasn't just about, hey, we have to get a tackle in here for the sake of it, as much as like they want a legitimate kind of successor to Lane Johnson on the offensive line. And if they can't get that, then it's not as important to just shoehorn a pick at that point. So liked it. I do think the discussion between Terry and Arnold and Quinyon Mitchell will certainly be fascinating. I like those guys a lot, both of them. They're kind of neck and neck for me. I did have Arnold above Mitchell, but it was pretty close. So that's the biggest gripe, I guess, I can pick when it comes to the top.
Yeah, I think if you go back and look at most drafts and you look at CB1 and CB2, one of those guys ends up being really good and one of them not so much. So there's the potential that screenshot's going to be around years from now if the Quinyon Mitchell pick doesn't pan out. But Jonny and I had spoken about who we preferred and why. And I think Jonny came on the Terrion Arnold side. I was on the Quinyon Mitchell side a bit there, but I had them neck and neck as well. It was, I believe, 9 or 10 and 11 on my big board. So you're on this heater. I feel like I should ask you to tell me who the Eagles are going to pick next year or what the lottery numbers are going to be or something like that. I forgot about the Nolan Smith one last year.
I wish I even knew like the prospects. I am like Jonny in the sense of like not the most tuned into college football as it's happening, as much as it's more of like a crash course for me leading up to the draft each year. So I would say offensive tackle, the position. I would go the position because the Eagles have wanted to do that for multiple years now. I know, Shane, you've talked about that and not loving that in terms of like you don't need to draft a successor this far out, but that is certainly something they wanted to do. I had heard they liked Amarius Mims, who I believe went off the board at 18 a lot. That was certainly someone that they liked a lot in this draft. So I'm just going to go safe and say they take a tackle next year.
On my live draft show that I did, I was fist pumping when Troy Fountainu went off the board to the Steelers because I just knew I was so sure that's where the Eagles were going to go. And I was really happy. I think it was Jimmy Kimsky that put out that the Eagles walked into the draft with 8 picks, selected 2 top 21 consensus players, and added a 3rd, 4th, and 5th round pick next year. And so that's just crazy the way. And I believe I also read that Howie tied the record or set the record for most draft day trades, which is just mind blowing. But you mentioned really liking the first 2 picks. You overall gave it an A. If you had to nitpick the draft, what's the thing that you're like, man, I wish they hadn't done this, or I wish they would have taken this guy? What's that move for you?
I think like most people would be like, the Jalix Hunt, pick is not the one that you like. You just have questions about it. The way I put it in my article that I referenced earlier is, Jonny, I don't know how familiar you are with this, or even you, Shane, but like, are you familiar with like a heat check in basketball?
Yeah.
No.
So Jonny and I have to explain our terms to each other all the time.
Let me try. Heat check. Is there some sort of like temperature check? Some sort of like gauging the mood of the.
You're not wrong. Yes.
Yeah.
Basically, in basketball, it's like, let's say I came down the court and I hit like 3 threes in a row, and I'm like, I'm thinking I'm on fire. I'm hot. I can't miss. So that's kind of what Howie did with the first 2 picks. It's like, oh my gosh, he gets Mitchell at 22. Doesn't even need to trade up. Oh my gosh, he goes up and gets Cooper DeJean, who's somehow still on the board at 40. Howie's killing it. He's on fire. And all of a sudden, I come up the court like that 4th time, and I take like a really bad shot, and I miss. And it's like, well, no one's really mad at me because I just made 3 shots. And so like you're feeling yourself a little bit too much. And I think that's kind of what happened a little bit here with Howie, where it's like, you know what? I nailed the first 2 picks, and now I'm going to get this guy who's going to, be from Houston Christian. No one even knows who he is. He's this athletic dude, and he's going to be this big hit for us. And I just think, like, I'm not saying it's impossible. I really like Jalix Hunt's personality. He seems like he's really driven. But when we're talking about like a 23-year-old guy, he's going to be like 23 and a half before the season starts. And who needs further development. And I just think he's a very theoretical player. And I think that means typically that guy doesn't actually become like the theory doesn't become the reality in a lot of cases. I think the odds are stacked against him in a lot of ways. And I'm not saying it's not a worthwhile gamble entirely. like I get the vision, but I just think that we have to be realistic with ourselves here, and it's just probably not going to work. And Jonny basically said the same thing in his breakdown, I think, on Leading Your Nation. So yeah, I feel better once you also condemned it.
Yeah, I haven't actually spoke too much about Jadix Hunt on the pod because I wanted to watch him first, and we will do like a full breakdown. And he's a weird player. There's snaps when you're like, wow, I get it, and there's snaps when you don't really get it. I think someone actually said commentary because I wasn't the biggest Nolan Smith fan either, and we'll probably get into this more. But it seems like the Eagles are really targeting edges who maybe don't rush the quarterback that well, which sounds a bit odd, but like his coverage is so good. Like that's the thing that shocked me about Jadix Hunt was obviously when they show like the clips on Daniel Jeremiah on NFL Network, they're showing like pass rush moves and sacks, and when you watch him, he really doesn't rush the quarterback that much. Like I don't know what the numbers are, but because obviously I'm only watching very select few games because of the college he came from, but he drops into coverage a hell of a lot. Like I think people, and I always think maybe it's just the way I view the game, but I want edge defenders that rush the quarterback first and then everything else is a bonus. Whereas the Eagles seem to be the other way around at the moment. It seems like interior pressure is their focus. Get pass rushers up front. You got Milton Williams, you got Jalen Carter, and then edge defenders, it's more about unpredictability. And I wonder if that's like a coaching arrogance. And I think Fangio probably is arrogant because he's very good at his job. Like an idea of we don't need the elite one-on-one guy because we'll put our guys in situations to win by being unpredictable. Therefore, it's more important to have unpredictability than it is to have elite pass rushing traits. But who knows? Because I think Josh Sweat is the opposite of that. He's not versatile at all. But then I also wonder if he could have gone in the offseason if an offer came in. So it's just something I'm working on at the moment is maybe they care about pass rushing traits less. But who knows? Maybe they just sort of want a combination of lots of different guys because he is really unique. Like if you check out the film, some of the plays are just like he's a weird dude. Like his body type's odd. He's so lean, and he really does look like he could play defensive back, which is not that common for an edge defender draft in the third round. Yeah, well,
that's what I mean. Wasn't it wide receiver turned safety turned edge rusher? Like that's a bizarre career arc. But
yeah, that's mad, isn't it? But no, I wouldn't say I condemn the pick too much. Although I did have a great comment from, I love BGN commenters because they always put you in your place when you get things wrong. And I think I sometimes exaggerate. So if I'm being harsh about a player, I'll try and say something nice. So I think I said something like, I'd have loved the pick in the fourth. And someone replied, it was like 6 picks before the fourth. You're basically saying you don't like the pick. So then I was like, all right, I exaggerated on that. I would have loved the pick in the fourth. I would have preferred the pick in the fourth. But like the second I can see someone's commenting green and I can see everyone thumbing up, I'm like, oh no.
See, that's like the worst thing about, with all due respect, I love the BGN commenters, but like, writing an article versus podcasting, you can say something on the podcast and like no one's going to like clip, some people will clip it and immediately respond, or the text, you can just copy and paste it and boom, just make you comment on how much of a fool you are instantly. So very humbling.
It's a lot easier to search old tweets and articles than it is to search old podcasts. So,
exactly.
I have said things on podcasts that I would not put on Twitter before. That's for sure. So, Jonny, now you learned some new lingo. You got to work heat check into your next article. I try to work flat track Boolean from time to time. You learn heat check now. We just keep this going around.
All right, sounds good. You said something about like him hitting three pointers in a row, and I guess that's good. Basketball is not my thing at all. So I'm going to assume, I just think basketball is a sport where everyone just scores 100,000 points a game. So it's easy, but I'm going to take my knowledge and not talk about it on the podcast because I will sound incredibly dim, but I do not have the time to watch even more sport than I currently watch. So I will not be getting into basketball anytime soon.
Fair.
That's fair. Well, let's go to a couple comments here and then we'll get into our contender draft recaps. We have Mark chiming in on YouTube saying hello. Chomping at the bit to get this season underway, lucked out and caught us live. I'm always astounded by how many people catch us live podcasting around Jonny's time zone. So as always, people don't get fired from work, but we do appreciate you being here. Ask us to please continue. Lance on Twitter says the BLG is back. Awesome to see the work you guys are doing. Absolutely love this podcast and the void it's filling in Eagles content. Also, I think from a process standpoint, this was one of Howie's best drafts. The way he maneuvered around the board and set our team up for next year was really impressive. So I certainly agree with that. So let's dive into the meat and potatoes of today's show. We're going to go through 6 teams. It's the 49ers, honestly, the entire NFC North, and then the Atlanta Falcons, teams that excluding NFC East teams, the Eagles and the Cowboys have the best odds to reach the NFC title game right now. We're going to talk about what they did in their draft, what we think of it, and just kind of give some initial thoughts. And then next week, Jonny and I will finally get to the promised film, maybe, if we don't have another guest in the pipeline. So let's dive into it. We'll talk first about the 49ers, who in the first round, they selected wide receiver Ricky Pearsall. In the second round, cornerback Renardo Green. In the third round, offensive lineman Dominic Pooney. And then on day 3, Malik Mustafa, Isaac Guerendo, Jacob Cowing, Jarrett Kingston, and Tatum Bethune. Jonny, I'll throw it to you first here. As you see the 49ers draft class, you think about their needs and how they addressed it. What are your overall thoughts about their draft class?
So it's probably a good sign when I didn't have down as their round 2 and round 3 players that I'd watched pre-draft. So I know they were overdrafted because I know that I covered the top 100 pretty well. Although, correct me if I'm wrong, Renardo Green, I've seen a lot of good stuff about him since this. Is he the guy who had a really good game against Malik Neighbors? Is that someone else I'm thinking of?
I am not sure on that. I know on the
Right.
Renardo Green was not in my top 100 either. He was 104 on the consensus big board, so he was just outside it.
Right, fair enough. I feel like I've seen stuff about him that I quite liked post-draft. So I liked a lot of their players. I just think they took them too early. But I think they got better, and I think they've got good players. So I really like Ricky Pearsall. Again, too early for me, but I think in that offense he's going to be really good. I think they'll use him really well. Jacob Cowing as well is another guy that I liked, and I think they got him at a decent value. Round 4 is about where I had him. I had him like a classic slot receiver, a little bit explosive, twitchy. And I really liked Isaac Guerendo, just a complete wild card. I wouldn't have taken him in the 4th. But I think compared to what the Eagles did with Will Shipley, which was a little bit like steady, I think the 49ers were like sort of just gone for it and drafted like the absolute freak, sort of speed freak. So I think Pearsall and I think Guerendo and Jacob Cowing just give the offense a little bit extra when it's already really good. My favorite pick, though, is the safety. I absolutely loved him. He wasn't in like my tier 1, but in terms of just watching him, I thought he was awesome. Malik Mustafa is like one of the most fun defensive backs coming downhill you'll ever watch. Like he's just incredibly physical in run defense, whether he's a little bit like old school in terms of like a safety profile and whether he'll struggle in coverage, because I'm not sure he can hold up in man coverage. But I think he can play like split safety. I think he can play quarters fine. So I don't know about the second and third round guys, which is weird when I'm talking about the 4th round guys, and I don't know who the second and third round guys are because I didn't watch them, and I only watched about the top 100. So overall, it felt like they overdrafted the early picks, but then sort of made up for it with a decent day 3. And if they keep Debo and Ayuk, although I think Debo is heavily overrated, if they do keep those two, that offense is going to be extremely good. Like if you're talking about Ricky Pearsall as your 3rd wide receiver, you still got George Kittle, you still got Christian McCaffrey, and then you've got maybe 2 explosive weapons you can use as your running back 2 or 3 and your wide receiver 4 or 5. I think overall they had a pretty solid draft, and it's hard not to consider them as one of the best teams in the NFC. The good news is, though, their coach has no idea how to manage games, which hopefully will be the downfall again this year, because I quite like the class and I quite like their roster in general. It's hard not to sort of like it, yeah.
Malik Mustafa has one of the best like defensive back names ever.
Yeah,
by the way, that's a great name for a guy that'll fly downhill into the box. But BLG, what do you think about the 49ers approach?
Yeah, I was reading some stuff on Hogs Haven as they're kind of trying to analyze Adam Peters, who came from the 49ers, obviously, about how the 49ers have had these drafts for a while now where the consensus, unlike the Eagles this year, like doesn't love where their players are drafted. But if you look at, how they've actually performed relative to the consensus, well, they've done a better job than the consensus. So certainly that caveat being acknowledged here, I still don't love the profile of like a Ricky Pearsall in the first round, a guy who's going to be 24 basically before week 1 or around week 1 and wasn't extremely productive in college either. I've heard Bo Wolf from PHLY kind of compare him to like a Van Jefferson kind of profile in that regard. So they probably don't need a difference maker because of what they have. And we'll see again what happens with Ayuk and Debo there. But I don't know that is my most favorite exciting kind of pick. And then on the whole, I still think, obviously I think they were kind of maybe in the same boat that the Eagles were and not really loving the tackles after a certain point. But, that's been kind of an issue for the 49ers, and that like Trent Williams, awesome, but he does get banged up. So that's a concern. There isn't really a successor in place there or amazing depth behind him anyway. And then Colton McKivitz has kind of been, I guess, generously up and down at times. So to not get a tackle there, I think is a big deal for them. But overall, it's hard for me to say, well, they messed up when they've really just earned the benefit of the doubt with this.
Yeah, I didn't really care for San Francisco's draft. I was lower on Pearsall than Jonny was. I had him at 56 on my big board, so I was actually quite a bit lower on him. And then, we talked about Ronaldo Green. I did like the Dominic Pooney pick. He was just inside my top 100, so he was about in that range where they drafted him. And that interior, the offensive line for them has been a big problem. So I liked that pick. Overall, I just feel like, you're in the Super Bowl last year and you lose. And then you look at what's transpired for them this offseason and we look at the draft. I just don't know that they got better. I wouldn't call anyone they drafted an impact player. And even if you're higher on Ricky Pearsall, the fact that you kept Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel, and you have George Kittle and you have Christian McCaffrey, and you really like to get Kyle Juszczyk on the field and play 21 personnel. How much is Pearsall going to play? How much is he going to be targeted barring an injury? So it feels like to me, they didn't do anything to like push themselves over the hump. I just don't see a big impact from this group in year one. And this is a team let's be honest. We just saw the Jared Goff contract. This is a team that's trying to race against the Brock Purdy contract, and which is going to be a fascinating discussion this offseason. But they're trying to beat that contract out because they cannot afford to pay these players what they're paying them right now when Brock Purdy's making more than $1 million a year. So they're in a win now window, and I just didn't see a splashy move to help them get over that. So I overall was not crazy about their draft. If I was pulling for them to be a good football team, I'm fine with it as an Eagles fan that they walked out of that with what they got.
Yeah, just quickly on 49ers before we move on. I think it's if they trade Deebo, I'm annoyed. If they trade Ayuk, I'm very happy.
Yes.
Like, I would love Ayuk to really kick off, go superstar wide receiver, go mentor, just because I think I loved him pre-draft. He was sort of my guy, and I still think he is by far the best of the two. So that would be my dream scenario, is Ayuk goes full like crazy guy, doesn't show up, like starts leaking stuff to the press. We know what receivers are like. There's a lot of money involved these days, and hopefully they can't afford to pay him top dollar as well, because I would love it if he goes. I think their offseason will hinge around that. If Deebo goes, I think Pearsall, although different, I think he's good enough to play sort of right away. So I don't think their offense will get dramatically worse, but their window is like now. Rookie quarterback, Christian McCaffrey, it's this year or next year. McCaffrey's not going to keep doing what he's doing. So, they're a really interesting team to follow, though, because they're going to be good, as we all know.
Brandon Ayuk is a top blank receiver. How is he? Top 5, top 10, top 20? Where would you guys put him?
10-ish. I'd have to look at a list. Maybe not top like AJ Brown, X, but outside of maybe the top 5 or 6 in that category.
Yeah, so my buddy, Rob Stats Guerrero was asking me at one point. He's like, "Who would you take? Devontae Smith or Brandon Ayuk?" And I'm like, I think each fan base is going to probably take their guy. I think it's close. I think Devontae hasn't had. I think he gets a little bit like less of a shine just because AJ Brown being here. Now you could say he gets the benefit of also being not always having the number 1 cornerback on him. But I think I'm with Jonny.
Yeah, I would say fringe top 10 as well. The Devontae Brandon Ayuk conversation would be really interesting. Deebo, I don't think Deebo's a top 25, top 30 receiver. Like, he's got an athletic skill set that's hard to replicate, but in terms of just being a receiver, I don't think he's even close to Ayuk. So I too would love if Ayuk ends up walking from San Francisco. So, okay, let's pivot to, let's talk about the NFC North, and then we'll circle down to the South. So NFC North, honestly, you kind of have to talk about all 4 teams if you're going to talk contenders. So let's start with the Green Bay Packers. I hate that this is a portrait graphic instead of a landscape one, but that's okay. They drafted Jordan Morgan, offensive tackle, in the first round. And then in the second round, they got Edgerrin Cooper and Javon Bullard. Third round, Marshawn Lloyd and Tyron Hopper. And then on day 3, Evan Williams, Jacob Monk, Keaton Oladipo, Travis Glover, Michael Pratt, and Kalen King. BLG, thoughts on the Packers draft class? Did they do enough to vault themselves into the elite in the NFC?
Well, they did not get Cooper DeJean, which I think it seemed like they kind of wanted him there. And I think that's why the Eagles traded up like they did to get him. So, and if I'm not mistaken, I was also looking at, did they get scooped at their first round pick too with Jordan Morgan? Because, okay, the Cowboys moved back ahead of them. No, but they probably, one of those top 6 offensive tackles. I think, that was like the top tier, like I was saying earlier. And then it was kind of a drop off after that to someone like Jordan Morgan or Kingsley in there. So, I like the Packers as a whole in terms of I think how they finished last season was incredibly encouraging and is a signal of kind of what's to come for them. They were the youngest team in the league. They got those guys a lot of playing time. You saw that kind of manifest over the course of the year, and something that the Eagles haven't done enough, where sometimes you let the young players play early on and they actually develop and get better in that season, and then by the end of the season they can help you win games. So I'd kind of like to see that Eagles take that approach a little bit. Obviously the Packers were in a different point timeline wise, but young team that finished the season on a really strong note, and they're adding a lot more young talent to the team, to that group already. So I think they're in a really good spot in the long term, just fortifying a roster that already had a lot of youth in it, and will project to be a serious contender, especially with Jordan Love leading them. I am buying the Jordan Love hype.
Yeah, when I looked at the Packers pre-draft to list out needs, I was like, they don't really need anything. Like, they're the youngest team in the NFL. Like, would you like a star receiver? Yes, but you're not going to draft one as late as you are in the first round. Then you're just drafting another young guy to throw in with all the other young guys. So I felt like they had the luxury to go wherever in this draft. The one thing that was bizarre to me is how they handled safety. Like, after paying Xavier McKinney huge money in the offseason to bring him in, they traded up to take Javon Bullard in the second round. And then they took another safety in the 4th round in Evan Williams, and another safety in the 5th round in Keaton Oladipo. So I don't know what kind of 5 safety defense the Packers are going to be running next year. But that was something that struck out to me as a little strange in this draft. But I had Jordan Morgan a little bit lower than where they took him. There was a lot of offensive linemen, and I know one of my co-hosts on the BGN Draft Show was really high on Jordan Morgan. So maybe you got that Edgerrin Cooper in the 2nd round. I thought was a good pick, but overall, I really did think safety, the way they handled that, was a little strange here. Jonny, what were your thoughts on the Packers draft?
Yeah, I like BLG. I really like, if I was a Packers fan, I'd be very excited. I'm not as high on Joel Morgan as that high. I didn't like round 1, round 2, that kind of vibe. But we know what offensive linemen, I always think it's stupid. I always rank them like round 1, round 2, and they always go higher when they're players like Jordan Morgan. And it's almost, at what point do I just stop ranking them that low? Because you're never going to get them there. Like, he's played left tackle 3 years in a row. He does have sort of smaller arm length, but extremely tested extremely well, really good in space. I think he'll be able to start pretty quickly if they need him to, but I don't know where he'll play for them as much, whether they'll try him in a few different positions. But then I really like it. Like, I didn't watch too much of the later round guys, so I can't comment too much. I would guess, Shane, the safety thing is because Bullard maybe can play slot corner, can play nickel. I really liked him. He is extremely physical in run defense, like good in zone coverage. I liked him as a player. I had him more like 2-3 rounds, so I think they got him probably roughly around where I had him. And then I really, really like Marshawn Lloyd. Gutted for fantasy because I was trying to pick him up everywhere. And with Josh Jacobs there, I don't know what value he's going to get. Like, if he had gone to the Cowboys, I would be drafting him very high in dynasty leagues. Just super explosive, like great size, 5'9", 220. If you check my spreadsheet out, I'm not just lying here. My comp was Aaron Jones. So I feel pretty good about how the Packers viewed him similarly to me. And that's the only name I put. So when that happened, I was like, yes, I sound smart. Just really good, like low center of gravity. As I mentioned, 5'9", 220. He looks like a 3-down back eventually to me. So I have a feeling they might just run Josh Jacobs into the ground over the next year or two. And then Marshawn Lloyd can sort of take like feature, like sort of backup snaps this year, but he will contribute. Like he will contribute immediately, and it means Jacobs can do the early down stuff. So I like the class. I like Edgerrin Cooper as well. He's a little bit of a hit or miss for me. Like borderline, just could be a bit of a bust if he doesn't sort of sort out some things, but physically and athletically outstanding. So I think the defense got better. You got talented offensive linemen, and you had another explosive weapon in the running game when they already have like 5 decent receivers and a good young quarterback. I think if you're a Packers fan, you're pretty happy. I can't pick too many holes in it.
Yeah, it's really unfair that the Packers went straight from Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers to Jordan Love. That's not fair at all. But okay, let's turn the page. Let's talk about another team in that same division. We'll talk about the Detroit Lions draft class. And in the first round, they got the other cornerback in Terrion Arnold that we mentioned earlier. In the second round, they double dipped at corner with Ennis Rakestraw from Missouri. And then on day 3, Giovanni Manu, Sion Vaki, Mekhi Wingo, and Christian Mahogany. An all-time hard to pronounce day 3 name draft for podcasters. But that's how they shook out. I had the best value in this draft for them is obviously Terrion Arnold. He was very high on my board. I had him 1 slot behind Quinyon Mitchell. For him to fall, I still don't understand what NFL teams were doing in the first round, letting these corners fall. But for Arnold to fall there, to be able to plug into that Detroit defense that desperately needed secondary help, I thought was a great value. And then they're able to get another guy that I thought was a pretty good value in Ennis Rakestraw on day 2. And everybody was applauding Brad Holmes for how he handled the draft. And then on day 3, I thought he just went totally rogue. Like it was a massive reach for Giovanni Manu. That guy was barely inside the top 400 on consensus big boards. Sion Vaki, those guys were just massive reaches, and they got back on board. Like I liked the Christian Mahogany pick. Christian Mahogany is a guy that I really thought the Eagles would have a lot of interest in the early day 3 range. And I'm surprised that they didn't select him, if I'm being honest. So I like the way they bounced back in the 6th round. They just had that unfortunate, that heat check, I guess we'll call it. We'll use
there it is.
Brandon's term. We're repeating it. So Jonny, it sticks with Jonny. They had the heat check moment and they missed that in the 4th round. But Brandon, what did you think of the Lions draft?
Yeah, again, I was Arnold over Mitchell neck and neck, very close. But I just think, you look at Arnold being this, first of all, we talk about, like scouting, the actual film and whatnot, which is your guys' especially expertise. I also love to scout like the interviews, especially at cornerback when like mentality, I feel like is such a big part of the game and having confidence. Like, obviously Jalen Mills was a flawed player, but I feel like in no small part was Jalen Mills able to have more success than maybe his talent would otherwise allow him to have, just because he was so confident and he did not get down if he got beat. And that's a big part of the game at cornerback. And I just see Terrion Arnold in these interviews, and he had this moment in his college career where he got benched for current Eagle Josh Jobe at one point. And he talked about that leading up to the draft this year and how that kind of really just lit a fire under him. And he was like, I'm not going to allow that to happen again. And, he is younger than Mitchell. He's only 21. He's produced in the SEC at a high level. So you have that. I know the testing wasn't as good, but I just think there are a lot of things there that I like with Arnold. So going to be really, and once the Lions made that pick, I was like, oh, of course they did. Like that's through and through. I think what this Lions culture under Dan Campbell is kind of about, having a swagger. I think he's like a great fit there. It was a really cool moment when he gets drafted in Detroit and all the fans are there and he's talking to them and everything. So I think that's a pretty good pick for them to start it off with. Everything else I don't really feel as strongly about. But yeah, I think Arnold is going to be a very good player.
One of the best, most desired qualities in a cornerback is just a touch of delusion. And Jalen Mills had that in spades. I will always remember like Jalen Mills having a receiver 5 yards behind him and the quarterback overthrows the ball and Jalen Mills gets the finger wag. It's like never failed. It was infuriating and hilarious at the same time. But Jonny, on the Lions draft, what were your thoughts overall?
You ruined it, Shane, because I was going to say he had a bit of a heat check moment, and then you said it already. So I promise you, I was thinking it. Weirdest draft like ever. Like I love the first 2 rounds. Like if I was a Lions fans, I would be so happy. And not just Arnold, by the way. I think Rakestraw is the absolute perfect. I think Rakestraw is a better fit for that defense than And Arnold is just in terms of mentality. Like if you think Arnold's culture is good, just like watch Rakestraw play. Like he hits everything. There's my favorite quote, I think, from the whole draft in Rakestraw's film from Nate Tice, who on a podcast said he takes on every blocker like it's an insult. And I think that's just a brilliant quote, because that is, and because when someone says something and it sticks with you, I'm like, that is how he plays. It's like, what are you doing blocking me? Like, you're not allowed to do that. The issue for him is like 1 interception in 36 starts. Lack of athleticism is a worry. 4.54 40. But you know what? Like, he's going to get called for penalties. He's going to be grabby. He's a bit Jalen Millsy. Like, has he got the talent? But his mentality is top. And him and Arnold are just going to be such good culture setters for that secondary. So I love the first 2 rounds. Like Rakestraw, I mean, I had him as a 2nd round pick, so I wasn't worried. Although I'm saying about the ball production and the size, I really liked his film. So I think those 2 are awesome together. Like, give it a couple of years, and that's going to be a really, really good 1-2 punch. It's going to be quite funny, actually, that the Eagles and Lions have done basically the exact same thing. They've taken 2 young quarterbacks back to back, and in 2-3 years' time, it's going to be fascinating to compare them. Then they just went totally rogue, and I've got nothing to say about the 4th round picks, because like that just seems like, from what I've read about the running back / safety, that's just total like overthinking it, trying to do something radical. Like, but the end of that, it's 4th round, so who the hell knows? Maybe there's something special teams there. But I did watch a bit of Wingo, and I really, really, really liked him. And I don't know why he fell, whether it was a size or off the field issue. So I don't really get how he was available in the 6th round. So if you had just swapped the running back and Wingo in the 4th and the 6th round, then I would say it's a brilliant draft. So annoyingly good, but I sort of love the Lions because I think like everyone just sort of loved Dan Campbell. So I'm quite happy to see them do well. They're not like a team like the 49ers where I'm hoping for their downfall. I want the Lions to be good. If it's not us, I'm perfectly fine with them being good. So yeah, I like the class a lot, and I am really excited to watch the 2 corners. Just culture sets. If you haven't watched Rakestraw's film, anyone listening, just go and watch like Rakestraw highlights, because the culture is top. So I think he's a perfect example of a player fitting a scheme and fitting a coach. Dan Campbell is going to love him.
This is the 2nd year in a row we've had the whole discussion about if you could just switch the round that the Lions took players in, we'd feel better about the draft overall. And I guess, to be fair, it generally worked out well for them last year. Everybody wants to point to the Jahmyr Gibbs thing, which have that conversation in 3 years. Nobody ever wants to mention the linebacker they drafted and how that turned out. But I digress. We'll move on to the Minnesota Vikings, who got the quarterback that they wanted all along in JJ McCarthy at 10, actually at 11. No. They traded up to 10. They were at 11. Then they also traded up and got edge rusher Dallas Turner. That left them with no picks on day 2. So on day 3, they got Kyrie Jackson, Walter Rouse, Will Reichard, Michael Juergens, and Levi Drake Rodriguez. BLG, what did you think about the Vikings draft?
I mean, they had to do something at quarterback, right? Unless you want to ride with Sam Darnold, which is not a real plan, certainly in the year 2024. So, they had to do something at quarterback, and they did. By getting JJ McCarthy. I think you guys can speak to him better than I could. I was not paying attention too much to the quarterbacks, given that the Eagles are not in that spot. But I think to be able to get Dallas Turner where they did was certainly a nice little ad for them there at that point. And then the rest of the draft, again, I'm not as in tune there.
Yeah, I do an exercise where I list out the best and worst value for each team in the draft. And for the Vikings, I said their best value pick was Dallas Turner. He was 8 on the consensus big board, and they got him at 17. And then I said the worst value was Dallas Turner because he cost them 6 picks to get. And so they traded 42, 188, and a second next year for 23, back when they thought they were going to package those picks to go up for McCarthy. And then they traded a 5th, they traded that pick and then a 5th and a future 3rd and 4th to move up for Turner once they got McCarthy. And so, there's a bit of a sunk cost in that we had to trade up to 23 because we were going to bundle those from McCarthy. I understand that, but then to turn around and trade, I think next year the Vikings have like a 1st, and then they don't pick again until the 6th round or something like that. So they have nothing in the cupboard there. JJ McCarthy, I think, is a really good fit for that system. I'm not like a huge JJ McCarthy guy. That's higher than I would want to be taking JJ McCarthy, but he's young, he is athletic, and I think he's going to fit really well with Kevin O'Connell and what they're going to try to do. So, I mean, I could see a younger version of Kirk Cousins. I could squint and see that in JJ McCarthy with a little more athleticism. So I didn't hate that pick, especially when you compare it to where Michael Penix Jr. and Bo Nix went. So, overall, I thought they got two good impact players in the first round. I really like the Kyrie Jackson pick too. He was in my top 100. I didn't think he should have made it to the fourth round. So you got a decent player there. But yeah, overall, that trade up is just going to hurt for a while, especially when you did not have to trade up to get McCarthy. So their biggest regret is probably not realizing that the Falcons were insane and that they could just take McCarthy at 11 to begin with. Jonny, what were your thoughts on the Vikings draft?
Firstly, strange question. Is Michael Juergens related to Cam? Are they brothers?
I have no idea.
Does anyone know? I've just seen the Juergens name and I'm frantically trying to Google it and I can't find it. Like no one seems to know. If so, love the pick. Never watched him, but the NFL bloodline. If not, no idea who he is, so don't care. Just thought it was interesting. I saw Juergens and wondered. Both offensive linemen, both surnames, but after Googling it, I don't think they are because I can't find it anywhere.
I don't think
I'm
so.
guessing,
Michael was born in Maryland, and I believe Cam Juergens was from actually Nebraska? Or
he's from Nebraska. I'm not sure where he actually, but I know he lived in Nebraska prior.
Maybe cousins or something, distant cousins. Who knows?
Right, fair enough. I'm going to assume that those places are far away based on how you said that. And not talk about my geographical knowledge. To be honest, I actually didn't watch JJ McCarthy much. I was a little bit short on time because I desperately wanted to get to the Eagles prospect, so I just sort of ignored him. Like I always, to be honest, funny enough, I was going to say the comment you just posted. So thank you. JJ is a great fit for Kevin O'Connell. That's how I feel. Like I trust Kevin O'Connell. I think he's really good. And I think the Shanahan guys seem to like McCarthy. And if they decide it's a great scheme fit, then I think they are right to go and get their guy. I think we've seen Shanahan guys with Trey Lance thing sometimes take the traits and it hasn't worked. And you see with Brock Purdy, those guys want a type. If McCarthy fits the type, then I think they'll do well. And I mean, what can you say about Dallas Turner? Like he's awesome. Tested well, great first step, like 13 sacks last year, high motor, can drop into coverage. Basically, they do everything. Like he hasn't got a big weakness. So to be honest, as much as we like to look down and go, oh, could they've got value there? And yes, you don't want to trade lots. If you come out the draft with two really, really good players, then it's probably a success. So if Dallas Turner ends up as a great edge and JJ McCarthy ends up as a franchise quarterback, it's a brilliant draft. If McCarthy ends up busting, they're going to struggle for a couple of years because he's drafted high enough that they're not going to give up on him anytime soon. So I haven't really got much else to say on the Vikings, to be honest. I feel like Dallas Turner is a very safe pick. McCarthy, it will come down to Kevin O'Connell, but I think I trust Kevin O'Connell. Like I think Kirk Cousins looked really good at times there, and for whatever reason, I think I have an idea that he is going to work. So that's based on unlike me, based on no film, just pure vibes. That is not based on any, and I may change my opinion if I ever get around to actually watching JJ McCarthy.
After hearing the stories about how Kevin O'Connell basically talked Joshua Dobbs through the plays because they got him, I think it was a Monday Night Football game or a Thursday, whatever. It was a primetime game. And he had only been with the team for like 2 days and didn't know the playbook yet, but he was starting and he leads the game-winning drive. And after hearing the stories about how Kevin O'Connell was basically just diagramming the play through the headset in the huddle, I fully believe in Kevin O'Connell's ability to work with any quarterback. So, Jonny, we've got a burning question here for you. We want to know is Johnny Page related to Jimmy Page?
Sadly not. Been called it many a time. But no, not his talent, sadly.
I just had a great idea for an off-season episode, Jonny. We can do a Jonny learns American culture or American sports and geography references.
Yeah, I'm not that bad to make it sound. I mean, you Americans are the one that don't travel very much, don't you? I mean, I've been to the States, so gonna throw out the. I'm very well cultured. Thank you very much. It's just. I mean, I'm a US history guy. I know all. It's just when I put things together on maps, sometimes I lose it. I can do states. When we start talking about cities, then I sort of lose my flow a little bit. But yeah, can we get rid of this idea that I've no idea what's going on outside the UK? I do go away. I do travel. I've been to the States. I've been to Canada. I've been to your neck of the woods. I do know a little bit, just not about basketball.
Where I live is where I'm pretty sure the phrase "neck of the woods" comes from, because there's literally woods like right there. So I digress. Let's move on to the team that had the number 1 overall pick in the draft. They made 2 top 10 selections. It's the Chicago Bears, who took Caleb Williams at number 1 overall, and then Rome Odunze, wide receiver from Washington, at 9 overall. In the 3rd round, they got offensive tackle Kyron Amagaji from Yale. And then on day 3, they got punter Torrey Taylor, who was the punter for Iowa. So he's got a lot of experience. It's basically like 8 years worth of reps and however long he was in college. And then Austin Booker, edge rusher out of Kansas. Jonny, thoughts on the Bears draft class?
Yeah, how cool is it if you're a Bears fan right now? Like, everything feels to be coming up. Like, I've already seen Caleb Williams tweets going around of him in training camp, people getting very excited of him throwing to air. But like his film, I did actually watch Caleb Williams. Like, his film is awesome. He's obviously a little bit rogue at times, and there's always red flags with every player. Like, there are a few red flags. But I think some of it was based on the college, sort of the way he played. I think the sacks and the ball security are the ones for me. But like, he is legit exceptional outside the pocket. He doesn't just like run when he doesn't have to, though. Like, he's special pocket awareness that I think is unteachable. To combine him with Rome Odunze, who was my wide receiver too, and I think he's also exceptional. Like, that is unbelievable. DJ Moore and Rome Odunze are going to be such a nice 1-2. Like, I think the sky's the limit for Odunze, and I'm surprised actually that there was not more guys nationally that had him above Malik Neighbors. I think it's the way the game is changing, that people want the explosive player. But I mean, I say explosive player, Odunze is extremely talented. Like ball tracking, I can't help guys that go up and climb a ladder, contested catch situations. Then I'd have nothing to say about the punter. I assume he's a really good punter. I would hope so, because he's in the 4th round. But I think Austin Booker was also a really good get. So 5th round, I was really surprised he was there. I would have thought he would have gone earlier. So I watched Austin Booker quite a lot because I was looking for, I had a feeling the Eagles would go edge. They didn't think it, but I watched a lot of edge and didn't watch the one they took, which is great. Thanks for that. So I had to go back and watch him in full after the draft. But he's played like 1 year of college, Austin Booker, like really raw, but like really good frame, 6'4", 240, really good arms, movement skills, basically really raw. And I even put there like a bet on traits over production, but they got their traits over production guy in the 5th round. Not to go back to the Eagles pick, felt like the Eagles maybe took him earlier on. So I think to get Austin Booker in the 5th round is a win as well. So you cannot complain, can you? If the top 2 work again, which I'm very confident they will, then I think they're going to look back as this being a draft class that maybe changed the future outcome for the Bears, who've had a pretty miserable time of late. So yeah, pretty good. Cannot complain at all.
Yeah, I think I saw the Bears have never had a 4,000-yard passer in a season. I mean, it might be very possible Caleb Williams not only does that, but he gets to like 4,500. So I'm very interested to see the Bears this year. BLG, what do you think of the Bears draft?
I think the Bears are on the upward swing. It's a tough division, so that's working against them. But I think they're kind of like the anti-Vikings in the terms from last year, where we all knew Minnesota was going to fall off because their 2022 success was like unsustainable in terms of they ranked low in DVOA and point differential and all those kind of indicators. And I think the Bears are not to the same degree, but a little bit on the opposite end of that, where Bears were 22nd in DVOA by the end of last year. They had a better point differential than the Steelers, who won 10 games somehow and made the playoffs. So, and I think just getting rid of Justin Fields, if you ever listen to me talk about anything football related, you probably know I'm not the biggest Justin Fields fan. I might be his biggest detractor, actually. And I think getting rid of him is addition by subtraction. And to go from him to Caleb Williams, I think is a massive, massive upgrade. There were just so many negative plays with Justin Fields. By eliminating those and obviously upgrading them into something more and better, way better with Caleb Williams, I really think the Bears are going to take a meaningful step in the right direction this year and might surprise. It might be a situation where I think typically, it's fair to temper expectations for rookies, but I think if you have a legitimate quarterback who can come in from day one and like, as we saw with CJ Stroud last year, I think like Caleb Williams could have that kind of impact from the jump.
Yeah. You look at, what they were able to do. Rome Odunze was one of my favorite players in this draft. He was very high on my board. He was my wide receiver too. I think he was like number 4 or 5 overall. Pairing him with Caleb Williams, that's just going to be exciting to watch, especially with, you mentioned DJ Moore. Like, I think this offense can legitimately be really good this year. And it's rare that you see a team just flip the script like that. But, the Texans did it last year. And I think the Bears could be a team that does that this year. And I liked Amagaji where they got him. I think that pick made a lot of sense. Austin Booker was a great value. I really love everything but the punter pick. And I'm not going to hate too much on a 4th round punter, even if your franchise quarterback just texted him and was like, hey, we don't really need you. So you're not going to be punting much. Had a comment come in here. Which tackle position will Amagaji play? He was a left tackle in college. I think he's probably like backup swing tackle because they have Braxton Jones, who played fairly well and is young at left tackle. And then they have Darnell Wright at right tackle, who they drafted in the 1st round last year. So I would imagine Amagaji is probably a swing tackle for now and maybe a future left tackle down the road if they let Braxton Jones go. But Rufus Rogers on YouTube says that Rome's a stud. The way Caleb plays makes me feel like he might be a middle of the pack quarterback in the NFL. I'll tell you this, in the world where Caleb Williams busts, I can tell you exactly how it will happen because he does have some bad tendencies. He's got those tendencies to, he has the tendencies to hold onto the ball far too long. And, some of that probably comes because of where he played and the fact that if he didn't score every possession, they were just going to lose. But he had over a 3.1 second time to throw and a 22% pressure to sack rate. And that pressure to sack rate is a big thing. That translates to the next level a lot. And so he's going to have to rein that in. And generally coaches will talk about they would rather a player be aggressive and you try to coach him to dial it back than have to coach someone to be aggressive. But in a world where he busts, it's going to look a lot like Justin Fields did, where he just holds onto the ball too long and he big play hunts. And so hopefully for Bears fans and their sanity, that's not what happens. It's not what I think is going to happen. But if it does, you can clip this out and we'll revisit it because that's how it'll happen if it does. So, okay, let's move on to the last contender. We'll go to the NFC South, to the Atlanta Falcons. And I mean, somebody has to win that division. And there's already chuckling about the draft board here, but they took Michael Penix Jr. in the 1st round. In the 2nd round, they took Rook Orohoro, defensive tackle out of Clemson, and then Braylon Trice in the 3rd round. On day 3, they got Brandon Dorlus, J.D. Bertrand, Jace McClellan, Casey Washington, and Zion Luge. BLG, thoughts on the Falcons draft class?
I mean, the Penix thing is just, it's great for content creators like us. I love also all the kind of contrary, like, no, actually it does make a lot of sense. No, it doesn't. And I think it's a matter of, and I don't know this for sure, I don't have like connections in Atlanta when it comes to this, at least, or in any other way, really. I think from the outside looking in, we always assume, or it's just like natural to kind of assume that everyone in the organization is pulling in the same direction. And I don't think that was the case here. I think Arthur Blank looked at how the Falcons have been just like basically miserable to watch for a while now. And he said, I don't want that anymore. I want, some competency. I want to win now. And that's why you sign Kirk Cousins. You don't sign Kirk Cousins because you think he's going to take you over the top, win the Super Bowl. There's no history of Kirk Cousins winning big games that makes you feel extremely confident in that. But he does give you a boost when it comes to your floor. That is for certain. So I think that's kind of like an Arthur Blank thing at that point. But I think the front office is like, we don't want to tie our aspirations to Kirk Cousins because we know there's a real ceiling there. That's where Michael Penix comes in, where they're going like, we like the ceiling here. We think he can actually be something, whereas Kirk Cousins has proven to be just kind of mediocre. So I think that's where you have, different factions kind of pulling in different directions. Obviously, at some level, you have to get that ownership approval to draft Penix. But yeah, I mean, just to give the contract you did to Kirk and then to take, an aging, injury-prone quarterback in the first round. It doesn't make sense, and it really you could have an awesome draft after that. That's great. It's still it's so hard to parse or separate that part of it. And I don't think, at least relative to consensus, they had this amazing draft after that. So that doesn't really even help their case. But yeah, not a fan.
Jonny, thoughts on the Falcons draft class?
I laugh. I genuinely laugh. I think it's got to be the worst pick ever. I genuinely there can't be. I don't care how it turns out. I think it's hilarious. I've like you, Brandon. I love listening to people that try to rationalize it. And then they sort of rationalize it. I mean, they have to really try, and nothing they say makes sense anyway. There is basically no good outcome. And I mean, that's a lie. He could be, let's say he's really good in 4 years' time. We'll all forget this and fine. If he's really good in 4 years' time, I get it. It doesn't mean the process is right. If the results work, fine. I think it's slightly different. To be honest, I felt a little bit similarly about Eagles picking Jalen Hurts. And obviously I got the Hurts jersey on now. Obviously that came out a little bit different. But second round mobile quarterback who has been injured in the past, you could rationalize it. And even then, I thought it was a really bad pick. And I think it still would have been a bad pick if Carson Wentz didn't completely burn down post-injury. You could argue maybe the Eagles knew and had reservations about Carson Wentz, but the Falcons literally haven't seen Kirk Cousins play for them, which just makes it, you can't have those reservations, because if you do, don't pay him. And I also find the thing that they didn't know what quarterback would be available, so they had to sign Kirk. Who's taking Michael Penix earlier? There will be someone available. You'd get a JJ McCarthy, you'd get a Penix. There's no way they were all going to go by 8. So if you really weren't convinced on him, just don't sign Kirk and wait for the draft. I don't know. I can't rationalize it. I genuinely think it's hilarious. And I do feel sorry for some Falcons fans, because, oh my God, that must have been such a depressing night. I was laughing. I was laughing so much watching it in the morning, because obviously I had no idea when I watched it. And I certainly know what they were doing. They then went back and they massively reached on Rook Onoroho, however you pronounce his name. I actually had Brandon Dorlis above him, who they got 2 rounds later. So I guess if they sort of swapped them. I do really like Braden Trice. Was really surprised he went in the 3rd round. Thought he would go earlier. So from that point of view, I think they got it's weird actually. You look at his I know production edge. People draft traits these days, and his arm length's not great, but he literally finished 1st in FPS in total pressures in both 2023 and 2022. And you're maybe you don't overthink these things sometimes. When someone finishes 1st in pressures 2 years in a row and can obviously rush the quarterback, just draft him. And I think fair enough. Can he bend the edge the way you'd like? Did he convert all of those pressures to sacks? No, but tough, competitive, physical player who wins. To get him in the 3rd round, again, not going to talk about the Eagles pick, but compare him to an edge that the Eagles got. They're just very, very different, extremely different profiles. So I think they sort of saved it with the Braden Trice pick. But I don't really care. The last thing I'd say about the Michael Penix deal, because I just can't stop talking about it, is I think it's a classic decision made by people that have never played sports or been in a locker room or understand anything about culture, because it's just a disaster. It just ruins everything culture-wise. And if you want to go back and talk about hindsight, did Jalen Hurts pick destroy Carson Wentz? Probably not. I think that guy was going to burn down anyway, based on what we've seen. But I think you have to say it played a role. I think Carson Wentz's biggest problem was he tried to do too much. And I think, I'm not going to defend Carson Wentz, but did he try and do too much because he knew there was an extremely talented, cool, likable 2nd round pick who's probably squatting double him, outrunning him in practice? Jalen Hurts might be the worst backup ever, because he's just coolness personified. And I've always thought that. So I think it's laughably bad. If I was a Falcons fan, I would be distraught. I'm basically, if I was a Falcons fan, just fast forward 2 years. Just get 2 years out of the way, wait till Cousins goes, pay off $100 million for 2 years. Michael Penix will be 26. Yes, you wish he was younger. Then it's start from there. I just don't get it. And it's even worse when you think, I genuinely think their roster's pretty good. I think Drake London's good. I think Kyle Pitts is decent. You've obviously got Bijan. You could have got such an impact player. There are so many good players they could have added at 8 on offense, or just gone defense early and taken a Latu Letu, having pronounced my guy, or Dallas Turner. Madness. Genuinely madness, I'm so glad I'm not a Falcons fan, because I would spend all summer probably depressed thinking about what could have been.
Yeah, not you mentioned the Braylon Trice leading the NCAA in pressures. He actually did that 2 years in a row as well. So it wasn't just 2023. In 2022, he led the NCAA in pressures as well. We've got a comment here that says you saying it's the worst pick ever is a little harsh. I would have to agree with that, especially since one time the Browns drafted a 28-year-old Brandon Weeden in the first round of the draft. But yeah, it was a bad pick. I loved the Braylon Trice pick. I had him 44 overall on my big board, and they got him at 74. So I really liked that pick, but I didn't really like anything else they did on the Penix thing. It's just like signing Kirk Cousins and then 46 days later spending a top 8 pick on Michael Penix Jr. Like, you can justify paying Kirk Cousins. You can justify drafting Michael Penix. You cannot justify both. You just can't. It's an indefensible use of resources. And Terry Fontenot, the GM for the Falcons in the last 4 years, has had the number 4 overall pick that he spent on a tight end, and then 3 consecutive number 8 overall picks that he's used to draft a wide receiver, a running back, and a 24-year-old backup quarterback to back up the guy he just paid $100 million to. And this cannot be we signed Cousins and then we fell in love with Michael Penix Jr. Like, you're scouting these guys all year. It was 46 days before the draft. It's just that's indefensible. There's so many, you could have traded back. There's just so many things that you could have done. I hated this pick. This was my lone F grade I gave out when I was grading drafts this year. And it's not just the Penix pick. Like I mentioned, Ruke Orhoro was way overdrafted. They got a good deal in Braylon Trice, but I didn't like this draft at all. I don't think it really helps the Falcons in their quest to push out of the always mediocre NFC South.
Yeah, it is hilarious though, isn't it? As I think BRG said, for content creators, it's brilliant. I'm just glad it's not my team. I enjoy laughing at other teams. I like it when the Eagles are relatively stable. Sometimes content can be dry when they're stable, but I'll take laughing at other teams and the Eagles just getting on with their business in a sensible manner.
Yeah. Oh, I clicked the wrong button and turned off my camera instead of unsharing the screen. Love that. Love when that happens. So, well, that's going to do it for our NFC Contenders draft recap. So if you've just found the podcast because you didn't realize that we had rebooted this thing, you can go listen to 2 weeks ago. We covered the Eagles draft. Last week we covered the other NFC East teams. So check those out. Make sure you click that subscribe button so you can get all of the episodes. You can find it wherever you stream your podcasts at Eagles Pinpole Network. BLG, thanks for joining us today. Before we get out of here, do you have any final draft takes, final thoughts, any Cowboys picks you need to poke fun at? Anything, the floor is yours, my friend. Just lay it all out there.
I did come across an interesting line about Tyler Guyton when I was reading through the Bob McGinn series that he does every year, where he gets these he makes like rankings, and he gets these anonymous scouts to kind of go on the record. Well, not on the record because they're anonymous, but he gets these quotes from anonymous scouts about players before the draft. And then I like to go back and look at what was said about these players that were the ones they're selected, obviously specifically by the Eagles in the case of posting on BGN. But I also kind of looked at what the Eagles rivals did as well. And one scout on Tyler Guyton had, quote, "He may be the biggest bust. He's an athletic freak, but he's just a mental midget," end quote. So interesting take there on Tyler Guyton, who I know was kind of a little bit more of a polarizing tackle prospect. So hopefully that is another Cowboys first round bust for them. But yeah, thanks again for having me, guys. Obviously, you can check out my written work at bleedinggreennation.com. On the audio front, I wish I had an answer for people wondering what is the future of BGN Radio, but the Twitter is still there, BGN_radio, and certainly you can check me out on Twitter myself at Brandon Gowton, at Bleeding Green. If there are any announcements in the future, that will certainly be one place to find them.
All right. Absolutely. One of my favorite things that's ever happened on this show was when Jonny said he would be okay with the Eagles taking Tyler Guyton in the first, and then I talked him out of it live on the air. That was a fun episode. But thanks for joining, Brandon. You guys be sure you go check out Brandon's written work and Jonny's written work at bleedinggreennation.com. Make sure you're following Brandon on Twitter at Brandon Gowton. Jonny, any final thoughts before we get out of here?
No, I was going to say, anytime, Brandon, always welcome. This is the moment where we say, go and follow Brandon, like he hasn't got like 10 times the amount of Twitter followers and 10 times the amount of Twitter connections and everything. So yeah, slightly strange being in the hosting chair while Brandon is literally Eagles legend. Obviously done a lot for me as well personally. So anytime you can join us, it's always a pleasure.
We should say if you follow Brandon, go follow us too on Twitter. I'm at Shane F NFL. He is at Jonny Page 9. Brandon is at Brandon Gowton. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we will catch you next week for another episode of On the Shane Page.